Hello and welcome to the DMing 101 panel. I am your host, Michael. I'm also the host of the RPG Academy podcast and the lead organizer of AcadeCon. And joining me today for the panel, it's a fill-in because our original panelist got sick. We wish Chris the best and hope he gets better soon. But I'm excited to have Jake with me today. So Jake, say hello to everyone. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jake Siedenberg. I have been playing games for, oh man, over 5 years now. And before that, I was a theater major. So I feel like that gives me a strange insight into the DMing world when it comes to improvisation.
I would agree with that. I've had the opportunity to play a game or two with you, run a game for you, and watch and listen to you play in some of Tom's games. And I think you're going to bring an interesting and exciting viewpoint to what we're going to do tonight. So I'm very happy to have you, Jake.
Thank you for having me.
As far as anybody watching, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are going to try to do questions at the end. So feel free to chat away. Hopefully, talk to each other when we say things that make sense. Let us know if we say things that don't make sense. Keep that to yourself. Uh, but we'll try our best if we have time at the end to answer a few questions. And we have a hard out at 8:30. So regardless of where we are at 8:30, we have to get off here because there's another show, another panel starting at 9, and Tom is a taskmaster and he won't let us go any further. So with all that out of the way, let's actually get into what we're going to do here tonight, which is an introductory how to start DMing panel. And a lot of this is going to be very much aimed at those of you who want to start running Dungeons and Dragons, and specifically Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. But at the same time, a lot of what we talk about is more system agnostic and could be applied to any role playing game that you might want to run. So it's a bit of a mixture of specifically to 5e and also just general advice. Uh, what I want to say before we get started, though, is everything that Jake and I share tonight are just opinions. They're educated opinions, they're experienced opinions, but they're still just opinions. So something we say may be completely against how you think a game should be run. You're probably right for you and your table. That does anything we say is just what we think or what has worked for us in the past. So I want to start very big picture. What does the DM actually do? What is their job at the table? And Jake, I'll start with you. When you think about that question, if someone were to ask you, like, what does the DM actually do in a big picture way, how would you answer that?
Man, that's a tough one right out the gate. In my opinion, I think what the DM does is he is the sort of the glue that holds the whole format together.
Okay.
Because not only is he the creator of the story, he's also the keeper of the rules. He is the guardian of everybody's safety and feeling open and whatever at the table. So he's really like the manager of the whole thing because he has so many different things that I guess he or she they need to be taken care of, whether it's somebody is feeling uncomfortable with the content, somebody is not understanding the rules, or somebody is having trouble understanding part of the lore of the story. And so really they are the boss, but more like that friendly boss that you have at work that you can talk to in a very cool way.
Excellent. I agree with everything that you said. For me, I try to think of it in the idea that the DM does a lot of things, really, as you said, a lot of different things that they're responsible for doing. But when I try to filter it down to an easy answer, if there is one, is I would narrow it down to the DM provides interesting situations for the PC to deal with. So I'm talking about like in the narrative of the game. And that's really it. That's really what they do. Is you're in a tavern, it's on fire. What do you do? There's three goblins running at you. What do you do? The greater Lich King is about to use the orb of Aranak and destroy the world. What do you do? And you just do that sort of over and over and over again. You're going to set the situation. Tavern's on fire. What do you do? And you let your players react to that. They may ask questions like, well, where am I in relation to the fire? Or can I get out? And then you kind of respond to their responses. And then it just goes back and forth like a conversation until the game is over, the scene is over, the session is over, or maybe even the campaign is over. So to kind of demystify what a DM does, you just create interesting situations and then just let your players play in it. and then you react to the reactions and you go from there. But there are a lot of individual elements to that that we're going to touch on as we go. So the first thing that I would say that you should do is set the table expectations. I've talked a lot on our podcast over the years about session zero and how important I think they are. It was something I didn't used to do. Like when I first started running games, I never heard of them. And then when I did hear of them, I thought they sounded dumb. Because why would you get all the players together and then not actually play? That just seemed like homework or something. Like it didn't seem like something that I would be interested in. But I've definitely found that now that I've started using them and I think use them well, I've improved the way my games run. I've improved the experience both for me and for my players. So, Jake, are you familiar with Session Zero? Is it something you do at your tables or have done at your tables?
Yeah, so personally, I was sort of in that same boat. Like, didn't really care about it. Like, why do I want to give up all this information at the front of the gate? I want to keep that secret so that it's a surprise for them. But when we sort of I guess started our second real campaign where everybody had a lot of play under their belt, we did do a session zero, and the easiest way to do it is we actually just set up a cookout, right? And so we came, we played games, we ate food at our friend's house, and then after that, it was like we sat down at the table while everybody ate. I pulled out 6 stacks of books. And I was like, this is all the information that you need. So just absorb it while we're sitting here. And what was really cool is after I was done with all that information, just watching them connect their backstories together, which is something
Mm,
I thought was so cool because usually, you got that trope of, oh, well, somebody's hiring people for a job. And so all 12 of you meet up in this tavern and then you got
yep,
to figure out why you're working together. But having them sit and say, oh, well, I was in the army at this point in my backstory. So let's say that we were in the army together for this stint. And then it's a way easier way to have the characters connect. And then those moments when they're, overcoming some sort of either like actual problem or emotional problem or whatever in the game, you can really watch them like soar on their own wings. And it's not something you had to create as the DM. You just gave them that session zero where they didn't have to worry about, rolling dice or doing whatever. It was about them working together without me to create a
right.
story.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces and parts to a good session zero, I believe, and I'm being very serious here. I could spend probably this entire hour and a half or even more just talking about session zeros, and because I think they're that important. But we don't have time for that. So I'm going to cover some of the things that I think are super important, but encourage anyone who's listening to seek out some additional resources. On our show, we have an episode that is just me talking about session zeros. There's a lot of other podcasts and articles that have been written on the subject. So there's definitely information out there. But in its base form, a good session zero solves problems before they become problems. I spend way too much time on Reddit and Facebook and Twitter just in general. That's just a blanket statement. But specifically, I spend too much time on there on like D&D forums and groups. And like literally every day, there'll be a question or two that comes up that says something along the lines of, this happened at my table and it upsets me. How should I handle it? And about 9 out of 10 times, or maybe even 99 out of 100 times, the answer is, well, that's something you should have talked about in a session zero, because the only reason people are upset is because they had differing expectations about what would happen. So, big picture, session zero covers a lot of ground. As you mentioned, it's a great way to intertwine the characters' backstories, and that's one of my favorite things that we do during a session zero, because I like to start my games with the group already a cohesive unit. I get that there is some fun to be had in the sort of the organic at the table as you're playing, people coming together, but I have found it's just easier to start with, you're already a group. It doesn't mean that you're always lovey-dovey and you always get along. You can be like soap opera family or like the X-Men family, where these two characters may not really like each other, but because of this third character that they both like, they're still willing to work together. And then maybe over time, that friendship will blossom, or maybe even a relationship will blossom, which can be great for the game. But I just find it's easier to start that way. But some of the things that will come up that can cause problems is like, what happens if I miss a session? If I can't make it, what happens? Does the game go on without me, or does it have to be everyone there, or we don't play? If you do play without me, what happens to my character? Does my character just sort of fade into the background and I'm there, but I'm not really there? Or will the DM create some sort of in-game reason why my character is missing? I get pulled away by a family obligation. If I am there, who runs my character? Does a DM run it or does another player run it? Can my character die if I'm not there and another player is running my character for me and they get me killed? Is that okay, or is that something that just can't happen? And these are the sorts of things that cause problems when you don't set those expectations at the beginning. And I show up for session 4 and find out, hey, your character died last week. Yeah, Sarah ran your character and she thought it would be a good idea for you to face the dragon by yourself while the rest of us got away. Sorry, your character's dead. I can see myself being upset about that, but really, if we haven't set those expectations, don't have a lot of grounds for it. Other thing can be the division of loot. If one character sneaks off on their own and finds a chest of gold, are they obligated to tell everybody, even though their characters don't know? Are the players, supposed to get an equal share about that? Experience points, how do you get them? Do you have to actually fight things, or can you get them through role playing? Is it milestones, or is it literally the things that you kill, you get experience points for? It can be things like, whose house are we playing at? What time do we play? Who brings the pizza? Does the DM have to provide anything? Which books are we going to use? Which game are we going to play? So again, I could talk for 2 hours about this, but it's setting expectations so that everyone's on the same page. So that way we don't have those types of problems. They don't come up at the table. Now, this is great if you're playing a campaign and you're playing with maybe your friends you've known for years, you played multiple games with. A lot of this will be like ingrained knowledge that everyone already knows. But if you take this to like a convention, for example, I ran a game today for some people I had never met before. You can do like a really quick, dirty version of just table rules and setting expectations. Have you ever done that, Jake? Have you ever ran a game for people that you didn't really know beforehand?
Yeah, so I've ran a couple games. If you remember back in the day before COVID, when we used to do games of the Rook,
Yep.
up in Cincinnati, yeah. And just playing with you and like Tom running games for him and his friends. So it is, yeah, you and I don't know. I guess I haven't done a session 0 with people I haven't played with in a while. And so yeah, it is really hard to try and very quickly because just even you talking about all the things that are important, I'm like, oh yeah, that is important in the session 0. And if I was supposed to run one tomorrow, I feel like I would leave a lot of that stuff out. And so it might even be good if you're planning on, going forward and hey, I'm going to run a game at this convention or whatever, predetermining what you need to do on a little just notebook paper or whatever, just to say, I need to cover at least these things. So that way, nobody's uncomfortable. Everybody understands what we're doing. Um, Myself, I am not great with doing that. I am
Yeah.
more of the, oh, I'll just trust people to be okay.
Mm.
And that is generally not the good thing to do, is just trusting random people.
Well, the thing is that will work most of the time, but when it doesn't, it's really bad.
Hmm.
Most of the time people are going to be nice and respectful of each other. But if you do have a situation where one player isn't on the same page with everyone else, it can make things awkward very, very quickly. And so one thing, just going back to session 0, like the last time I did a big session 0 as a player, it was like a month-long process. It wasn't like we got together at the table. We were doing this over like Discord and Twitter chat, DM messages for literally weeks and weeks, talking about the game we were going to play in the world, creating our backgrounds together. So a session 0 is basically everything you do before you start playing the actual game. And it doesn't mean you literally take a session where you get together and do this. It can be done beforehand through other means and technology, but it's just all the stuff before you actually start playing the game. But when you're playing with strangers, especially, there's a few things that I would suggest that you use. And one is called hard limits or soft limits, also known as lines and veils. And these are things that are just hard limits, or lines are things that are just not going to happen in the game. Like, it, full stop, we are not going to have these in our game. And so for me, one of those things is like sexual assault. We're not going to have that in the game whatsoever. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to joke about it. There's never going to be a description of any sort of sexual assault on the table whatsoever. That's a hard limit for me. If I start to do it, I want people to shut me down. If someone else starts to do it, I'm going to shut them down. A soft limit or a veil is something that you might deal with, but not directly. So very typically, you'll have the situation like the bard. I know it's stereotypical, but the bard that wants to have sex with everything, right? Okay, fine. If you want to be that player that wants to have sex with a barmaid or a bar dude, I don't know what the male version of a barmaid is.
A
That's your
server.
a server. That's your business. But we're not going to deal with it at the table. We're going to say you and your agreeable companion go off. You spend the night together. It's great. Next day, but like we're never actually going to talk about. Well, let's roll to see how good you are, or like a seduction roll. It's just that happens, but it's off screen. We close the veil on it. We start back the next day. That's happened. You in your own mind, you can imagine it however you want, but we're not going to deal with it at the table. So that's like a soft limit. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you heard of the X card or the undo button? Is that something you've ever had to
So
use before?
that is something we learned, my wife and I both, at the AcadeCon back, when we were allowed to see each other in person, yeah, pre-COVID. We were playing some kind of game. I think it was like with the tower that you pull. What is that called? Dread.
Dread.
We were playing Dread, and it was like it was our first year there, and so it was very like culture shock because here's all these other nerds that we didn't know existed,
Yep.
and it was explained like, hey, if you start feeling uncomfortable, she said just make an X with your hands, and like nobody's gonna say anything. We're just gonna move on, and it's something that we sort of adopted at our table, even we're just playing board games and stuff like with my wife. And even if we do it like halfway joking, like, oh, I'm just gonna go up and throw one of these up, like it's strange how well that's respected because
Hmm.
it's people understand like, hey, maybe he actually is a little uncomfortable, and that's why he's making this like slightly jokey thing of just, can we please tone it down slightly.
Right.
I think it's important to also be able to read your table, and it's hard when you're playing with random strangers.
Right.
Because I know with the group that I play with, sometimes depending on who's there at the table, we might travel a little bit further down the road of Mr. Bard with his barmaid,
Hmm.
just for the comedic effect, not for the strange antics effect.
Right.
And of course, but we know, like, hey, everybody in this room is totally fine with this, and we know where that line is, that hard line, that we can all stop before we get there.
Right.
And that's something, just whoever you're playing with, you just have to get to know them and find where those are. And sometimes it's a conversation at session 0 to be like, hey, I like to say, a few curse words as a funny, gag here and there with certain characters. Is that okay with you?
Hmm.
Or it's just, you know, getting it all out of the way at the beginning and saying we're
Right.
we're not going to do that. We are going to do this.
Right. And when you're playing with people like your friends, I absolutely play differently with the people I know well. And we will, like you said, go further down roads than I would with strangers, just because I feel comfortable and I feel like we all are enjoying that. I mean, if you're playing with your own group and you wanted to have like an X-rated game where you know, explicitly describe things you're doing, as long as everyone at the table's fine with it, there's nothing wrong with it. Do it. But that's probably not something you should do with strangers. And I think the X card is a great way to give people a safety net for something that they may not even themselves realize is a trigger. And I had this happen to me well before I even knew what the X card was. This is like 15, 20 years ago. I was playing with a group of people that I knew fairly well. We played together for a few months. I've talked about my Cleveland group quite a lot on the podcast. This was like the pre-Cleveland group. It's where I just started playing in Cleveland before I got into the other group. Not that any of that's important. But I was telling a story. I was the DM, and my games are generally PG-13 anyways. Like I don't really get into a whole lot of stuff most of the time. There was some exceptions, but I had this one character that wanted to play a druid, and I was setting up this series of challenges that they had to go through to be accepted into the druid circle, whatever. And so it was basically like they had a trial where they had to face a bunch of spiders. There was a trial where they had to face a bunch of snakes, and a trial they had to face a bunch of scorpions. And the whole thing was they just had to not do it. Basically, they just had to walk through them to show that they were one with nature. Didn't know that one of the players had a huge spider phobia. And me just describing the way the spiders looked and acted, because I was trying to make them seem scary, because I wanted the player to have to make that decision of, how do they deal with this, freaked this person out. And they weren't even the player. They were just listening to the description to the point they had to get up and leave the room. And then after they left, this player's wife leaned in and said, "Oh, has a big issue with spiders." I had no way of knowing. We didn't have the X card, and fortunately, they removed themselves from the table. But that's the problem when you're dealing with people and their triggers. Sometimes they can't. Like when they start to have a visceral reaction to something that's being described or portrayed on the table, sometimes they can't even get themselves out of the situation. So this is all to say that something that may seem, silly, or not even silly, that's a bad word, but innocuous, something that shouldn't be an issue, isn't an issue for you, but it doesn't mean it's not an issue for someone else. So be aware of it. Make sure you're using your safety tools, whether this is your friends you played with for 20 years or people that you just met 5 years ago. There's no reason not to have these kind of safety tools, even if you never use them. Having them is important. And again, we could talk about session zero for another hour, but we need to move on. They're super important. They solve problems before they become problems. Please do them because I think it'll make your games more fun for you and for other people. All right. So, Jake, so we know what a DM does. We've had a session zero. We have our players together. We're ready to start running a game. The first big question for brand new DMs a lot is, what should I run first? Should I go out and buy a module, or should I make up my own game, my own story at the table? So what's your opinion? If you were either the first time DM again, or someone asked you that specific question, would you tell them to run their own thing, or buy something, or which, or and why?
So when I first started playing games, I sort of got just roped into it because they're like, "Oh, you should come watch." And of course, I watched and I was like, "This is awesome! I want to do this." And then they started a game, and I got to play for maybe like 4 or 5 sessions. And literally, like at the end of that, the DM was like, "I don't want to DM anymore." And like I was like, "Well, I'll do it." And of course, I didn't even own any of the books. I barely had a grasping of the rule set because what I had watched was 3.5, and
Mhm.
then we jumped to 5e, right? And so I literally had no knowledge whatsoever. But still, because I was so excited about the concept of telling the story and being the one in charge, right? My god complex. Um, I was able to become the DM, and I had no idea that there was such a thing as a module where I could just grab the book and then read out of the book, and then I wouldn't have to do any prep.
Right.
And so I didn't know anything about like the Faerun world. I didn't know literally anything, and so I sat down on my office computer. I threw together some kind of little crappy map, and I went ahead and I just wrote like a short story that was basically like players do this, and then they go here, and then they go here, and then they do this, and then the bad guy does this, and then they win. And I was like, this is going to be so easy. And of course, as soon as you jump in there, like your players are just like, whatever you had planned, they're not going to do it. Like
Yeah.
hands down. So as I've grown older, I enjoy the fact that I started with the homebrew, building it all from scratch, because now instead of having to use the D&D books and all the lore that's online, having to use that as a crutch, I can now use it as inspiration and say, I really like this cool backstory they have for the Queen of Chaos, but I'm going to scrub out a bunch of this stuff and I'm going to make it one of my antagonists in the game, and they're not going to know about it, even
Hmm.
though they're in the chat right now listening to this. So now they know. Um,
Whoops.
but yeah, and so that's why I would say, if you really want to get into DMing, there's a reason you want to be a DM. And so I would say, don't be afraid to get in there and just start writing. I mean, obviously, definitely read the books first, because thank God I have a really nice rules lawyer on the my table. So he was able to fill in all of those gaps when people had
Mhm.
questions. And I hope now I've become a little bit of a rules lawyer myself. But I think being able to take full control without any of those crutches, then when you need that time off, when you need to take a break, then you can pull out one of those modules and say, well, I'm going to shove this in here.
Mhm.
And I've done that before, even with the campaign we're running now. It's totally written from scratch, but I was like, man, I really need something to fill this gap, and I can't think of a good story. So I just took the first half of Waterdeep Dragon Heist, where they get the little talking rock before they even get to the dungeon, that whole
Mhm.
gambit. And I was like, I'm just going to take that and I'm going to change what they're going after. I'm going to change some of the guilds that are fighting. and plop it in there. And
Right.
it can become a tool that you use rather than, oh, I can't write anything. I have to go and wait for the next book to come out. And then
Mm,
I'm stuck only going to level 11 because I don't know what to write after, this book.
right. Yeah, it's well, one thing I'll say is that I'm a big believer that the DM doesn't need to know the rules to run the game, but you need someone at the table that knows the rules. Uh, so I'm definitely glad that you had someone at your table that could help you with that. So I'm kind of along the same lines of you. The part of the reason why I like to DM is I like to tell stories. I like to create places and people and things, and I like to create the scenarios and see my players interact with them. So that's the fun part for me. But there are some people that will be, pushed into the DMing role that's not necessarily the case, or maybe they just don't have enough confidence yet to do that. So I think using a module that you buy can be very helpful. But for me personally, I have often fallen more into the negative aspects of that, which is if they go in a direction that the book doesn't anticipate, I don't know how to get them back into the story the book is telling me to run. Or I have a really bad memory. So, if they say, well, let's go talk to the blacksmith, what's their name again? I don't remember what the blacksmith's name was. So now I'm flipping through the book trying to find the blacksmith's name because I don't want to say the wrong name because that will mess up the continuity of the story.
Mhm.
Or what's probably going to happen is I'm going to go, oh, yeah, that was Thomas. Well, actually, Thomas was the mayor, and I got those confused. And so now when we get to the part where the mayor shows up, I have to change their name because I can't have Thomas the mayor and Thomas the blacksmith. And then I have to remember that I changed the name of Thomas the mayor to something else. And I'm just going to get myself confused. And so on session 3, I'm going to mess that up and confuse everybody, or they're going to have to watch me flip through the book, which is no fun for anybody. So I know that seems like a very small thing, but it can, in my mind, it becomes this big deal that if I mess up the name of an NPC, it can like ripple effect and ruin the entire campaign. So part of the reason why I like making up my own stories is I can just make that up on the fly and it doesn't matter. And I'll just write it down. Not that I couldn't do that anyways, but it feels different to me when there's a book I'm supposed to follow. So my answer now is that it doesn't matter whether you write your own story or if you try to follow a module if you prepare the same way. Now I'm an old man, so I use color coded note cards. I'm sure there's a technology out there that could do this so much easier and so much faster, but this is the way that I do it and I have found it to be very, very beneficial. So whether I've started my own campaign where I made everything up, or if I'm taking a module I'm taking straight from the book, or a combination of the two, like you said, I take this NPC and this plot element, but I mix them together differently. I'm going to take a certain color of card, and I'm going to make a card for each of the player characters. And I'm going to have all the stuff like what their race is and what their class is and that kind of stuff. But what I'm really interested in is how they connect to the story. So during our session 0, one of the things that we often do is I have players create NPCs. So they'll create someone that's maybe like a former rival, a lover, a brother, a mentor, just a contact they have, or maybe just someone that they don't have a connection to, but they know of as they exist in this world. So on the back of the player card, I'm going to write down all the NPCs that they already have a relationship with. And I'll do something like from 13th age, I'll put like a P if this is a positive relationship, or an N if it's a negative relationship, or a C if it's sort of a conflicted relationship. Then I'm going to make a different color card for every NPC in the game and a little bit about them, like a physical description or some sort of role play aid that, they talk really loud, they talk fast, they lie a lot, they boast too much, something about them that will, when I get to role playing them, it'll help me remember how I wanted them to act. On the back of the card, I'm going to connect them to how they interact with the story. So, does this NPC know who the actual murderer is? Is this NPC the actual murderer? Does this NPC know the secret entrance to the tomb where the key can be found? Does this character know a rumor about the fact that there is a key to be found in the temple that can be found? Then I'm going to take another color card and create all these places. So, the tavern, some little couple descriptives about it, like where it is, what's the name, is it a rowdy place, is it a calm place, whatever. On the back of that, I'm going to write how that place relates to the campaign. So the owner NPC will write, Jed, owner of tavern. The tavern is where you'll hear the rumor about the key. And then I'll do one for the temple. Temple has a secret basement. Inside the secret basement is where you find the key. And then I'll put, the priest is the one that knows about the secret entrance, whatever. So I have all these interconnected cards that relate to each other. And when I actually sit down to run the game, the only thing I need are these cards that I have made. And if we kill an NPC, I'll basically write that they're dead. If we create a new NPC on the fly, I'll just write a new card right fast. If they find a rumor, I'll write that down. So once I'm ready to run the game, all I need are these cards. So whether I take a module and convert that module to these cards, or I make up everything on my own, or a mixture of the two, once I've done all that prep work, I'm ready to run the game. And just very quickly, like I was that kid in high school that never had to study. In high school, I got bad grades, but I didn't study. In college, I got good grades, but didn't study. But I would make note cards kind of similar to this. Like in class, I would listen to the teacher, and I would write notes. And the process of writing these notes is how I remembered everything. So it's kind of the same process. In making all of these cards, I kind of put all this information in my head so that it's usually at the tips of my fingertips, so that I don't even have to reference the cards that often. So does that make any sense, Jake? Does that would you do anything like that, or am I just crazy talk?
So it sounds to me like you need to use Google Docs. I just imagine it, because of the breadth of the NPCs. Because our campaign, we're like in the middle of Waterdeep, so it's like we'd be adding like 6 cards a night because my characters. Because I come from an acting background, like there's a random person I describe, they're like, I want to talk to that guy. And it's like, great, I have nothing prepared for this, so I'm just gonna wing it.
So
Uh,
make it up.
but what I usually do, and it's funny because we on one of the podcasts for the Stargate RPG that the RPG Academy just hosted, um, the writer of the book was talking about how he likes to think of every session like an episode of a TV show, and
Mm,
obviously a TV show being Stargate. And I almost try to write my sessions like that, where I try and think, okay, this is where we're starting from. How far do I think I can get in this story within my 2 3 hour 4 hour session? And then I try to think of one big cliffhanger at the end that I can get to no matter how things work out, right?
right.
Um, and generally what I do is I'll literally title it just like I would any other. Oh my gosh, some of these titles are kind of silly. But my most recent titles that I have on here, I have one called Tales from Yartar, and the one before that was called Journey to Neverwinter, and the one before that was called Black Spider's Barrow. And so they're not like amazing or anything, but each one sort of leads into the next one. And so I have hundreds of thousands of these Google documents, kind of like you probably have hundreds of thousands of note cards.
Right.
Um, and I'll use that as almost like a script for myself to say, this is where we are. And in a lot of cases, I'll be like, let the party decide. That was the big one last time, is they were trying to get to the Underdark. And I was like, let them figure out how to get to the Underdark. And so I put some options that would be available for them to pick, but I did not railroad them into saying,
Mhm.
I'm going to talk these ones really bad, so they're forced to go to this one.
Right.
Obviously, I tried to pamper it a little bit because I wanted them to go to Yartar to go down. But yeah, I generally I'll use Google Docs to sort of write each session the way that I imagine it going, but in very quick lines, like
Mm.
they do this, I hope, in parentheses.
Yeah.
Because they never do. But
Of
something
course
I
not.
guess that's closest to note cards is I like to do a lot of flowcharts,
Hmm.
where I will take like a main villain or whatever. So you could say like Xanathar, right? Put him and then have lines connecting him off to whether it's characters, whether it's like, his generals, whether it's his adversaries. And then I can use this, I think it's called Lucid Chart, is what it is. It's like a Google tool that is sort of available through Google Drive. Where I can say the reason that Xanathar is connected to this person is blah 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 blah, and
Hmm.
I'll use that as sort of like the skeleton of the whole campaign and then try and go from there. And so that's the closest. They're kind of like digital note cards.
Right.
Um,
Like I said,
but
I knew there was a digital and easier way, but I'm an old man. I like my color coded note cards. That's the deal. That's the way it was, and I liked it.
yeah,
But you kind of touched on something I wanted to touch on as well. Is my sort of view of prep versus planning. And I think this is a big thing that a lot of new DMs struggle with. And I know in particular, Evan, who was the first co host I had on the RPG Academy podcast, we talked specifically about this in some of those very early episodes where he wanted to plan out every contingency. He literally wrote out dialogue like an NPC in a video game, what they would say when we asked specific questions. But he got so worried that, well, what if we asked a different question? That he was writing pages and pages of dialogue that we never touched on. Like you said, like the players never do what you expect. So he was spending hours prepping for a game, and it was almost all wasted prep in a way because it was too specific. That if we didn't talk to the specific NPC about the specific line of questioning, a lot of his prep was kind of wasted, and he started getting very uh, anxious and nervous. And he actually got to the point where he canceled a couple games because he felt like he wasn't ready, even though he had prepared for hours and hours and hours. So the advice I gave him, and I'll give to anyone listening now or in the future, is I like to prep situations. I don't like to plan. And to me, the difference is planning is where I try to figure out what I think will happen. And prepping is just I set up an interesting situation, kind of like again at the beginning of the whole thing. I said that's my job is to set an interesting situation, but I don't plan for an outcome. I just plan the situation, or I should say, prep the situation. So I may say, okay, there's three ogres coming towards the village where the players are at, and that's where I'll stop. I don't expect the players will fight them because as soon as you expect the players to fight them, they won't. They'll try to bribe them, they'll try to trick them, they'll try to seduce them. Um, they may pull a Blazing Saddles and try to create a fake Rock Ridge village 10 miles closer to the ogres, so the ogres destroy the fake village and not the real village. They're going to do something you don't expect. And if you spend a lot of time planning for, okay, well, when the ogres attack, the players are going to fight them, and when they fight them, this is what's going to happen. The moment the players don't follow your plan, everything you've done past that is kind of wasted. I say wasted, even though a lot of prepping can't be wasted because you can always just reuse it, you can recycle it. But it's easier for you. It's like quicker to just go, okay, there's three ogres, and then just wait to see what they do. And if they decide to fight them, then you can roll out the combat rules. If they decide to try to seduce them or trick them or bribe them, or hell, they might join them and they might help destroy the village, then you get to have the same amount of fun because you're like, I didn't expect this. This is great. And then you use the rules where you need to figure out how well their plans go, which probably won't go well because that's part of the fun. But when you start to plan outcomes, you kind of force yourself sometimes to want the players to do what you thought they would do, and that's where railroading comes in. I know that's a really bad word. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people think, but when done poorly it is bad. And I think that's where you sort of feel like, well, I planned for this big fight, I need to make sure they fight, otherwise all my planning is a waste. Does that make sense, Jake? Do you have any thoughts on
Yeah.
planning versus prepping?
Well, I'm glad you brought up railroading because I feel like at my table there is the sort of the joke is the character or the players, they know when I am railroading. Like it is very clear. I think the last session I did a really hard railroad, and like literally one of the people was like, "All right, everybody aboard the train. Here we go. Choo choo."
Yep.
And so I don't know. I feel like it really does have its time to be used. And I was very upfront, I think, with the characters. I'm pretty sure I said this. They'll be in the chat saying I didn't, but I'm pretty sure I said I need this thing to happen. Just let this one thing happen, and then we can be good. Um,
Right.
and so, and of course you can plan around certain things. You could say like, it looks like these ogres coming toward the village, they don't look like they're gonna be ready to talk. They look like they're ready to fight, and so
Mhm.
you can plant that idea in their head of saying these aren't worth fighting. But if it is like detrimental to the story that these three ogres don't get killed, then you kind of have to use every trick in your book, even if it is just kind of like the boring, oh, they see you and they're just running straight for you, no thought, they're animalistic, they're just coming at you.
Mhm.
um but I think the best way to get around the whole like planning, and I don't know, I think this all came about at one point when season 8 of Game of Thrones came out, right? And they were talking about the difference in writing between a planter and a planner. And so George R. R. Martin, when he was writing the books, he was described as a planter. He took his characters like little seeds, planted them in the ground, and let them grew where they would. And he sort of wrote the story with them as they grew. Versus when it got caught up on the show, they were like, okay, we need to get to this point by the end. So here's the things that are going to happen. And it felt wrong to a lot of viewers. I know some people probably enjoyed it, but I know a lot of people, you felt like these characters were making choices that weren't real to them because you weren't watching them slowly grow to that point. And so what we've done very interesting with this newest game that we're playing now is I call it, and uh this is my geeky side coming out. It's based on a philosophy from John Locke. I call it tabula rasa. Okay, and basically it's the theory that individuals are born without built-in mental content. So basically every single thing that you know comes from experience, perception. Like your whole thing is a blank slate, right?
Yep.
And I took this idea and I said, okay, I want you guys to create your characters, create your backstories, and give me what I call knives. And I'm pretty sure that floated around on Reddit at one point, but just like things that your character has done or knows that can be used against you. So I can stab you in the back with your knife. And so I have a whole little sheet that they filled out and gave back to me. And not until I got all that did I start writing. And I said, oh, so this character, this is kind of the struggle that they have been having their whole life. What sort of story would go with that? And instead of planning every single part of this story and building on it to say, like you're writing a book, like this is what's going to happen. Rather, what I started doing is I said, well, here is the big adversary that they have, right? This is what their adversary wants. This is how their adversary is going to go about getting it. And then I just plop them down in the world and let them figure it out themselves. And so if they don't go the right direction to figure this out, I'll punish them story wise to say, you have two time-based missions. You can either escort this wagon south or you can go loot this dungeon. And they say, well, we're going to loot this dungeon before other people come. And then, of course, oh, the wagon going south got taken. And so everything was stolen. And now you're in trouble by blah, blah, blah. And
Mhm.
so I don't pull any punches when it comes to that. When I give them a clear choice that says either you need to do this or you need to do this, they're stuck with that choice. And I think that's where if you don't plan what they're going to be doing in the session, you plan the world itself and say, this is what the bad guy's motives are. This is
Mhm.
what he's doing. And then, of course, you got to get into some of the nitty gritty to say, like, this specific NPC is doing this and this specific one is doing
Right.
this. It gets a little nitty gritty that way, but it makes it their story rather than your story that they're playing in. And I think that's what makes like this game that we're running in right now so special
Right.
is because they have written most of it and I have just written what the bad guys are doing.
Right.
Everything pertaining to them is all from their minds rather than this character is going to do this.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, and I mean everything you said, I completely agree with, and I like a lot of it. I think it's I don't maybe outside the scope of what we're doing tonight, but definitely a session zero where you get backstory. You need to take that backstory and try to weave it back into the story that you're telling.
It's a reward for them, really.
It is, and I talk about the thing where players find their own fun. Player, you can tell what a player is having fun doing because it's what they do when you as a DM aren't making them do something else. So if they're they're having fun doing this thing, talking to this one NPC that's really not important, but they're having fun doing it, well then that NPC needs to become important because that's what they're finding fun doing. And so the same thing with the backstory. If my character tells me that in their backstory they made a decision that cost a loved one dearly, maybe it cost them their life, maybe it cost them their fortune, their family home, that's telling me they want that to come back into the story. It's important to their character, and maybe not directly like that situation again, but maybe in the then like in the fifth session, they're now involved in someone else's story in a similar situation. There's another family that has a decision to make, and if they make the wrong decision, it could cost them their family home. So it's like, I dealt with this before. This is going to mean more to me than any of the other player characters. So I want to make sure that we help this person solve this problem in the best way possible. So they kind of deal with their own ghosts and their own demons by helping another person through a similar situation. Absolutely. If a player gives you stuff in their backstory, I think it would be like the worst kind of DMing to ignore that. Doesn't mean you have to put it one for one in the story, but it should like echo, and there should be flavors of it sprinkled in, if not directly related. Like if they have a rival who they've fought with time and time again, then yeah, that rival needs to show up. But if they just have like a general, I was betrayed by someone who loved me, then maybe in the story there should be some elements of betrayal or the potential of betrayal or reconciliation. Maybe the person that betrayed them comes back into the story. Do they betray them again? Or does this time they actually keep their word and you start to heal that relationship? So I think that's excellent DMing advice, but I think it may be a little higher level than what we have time for today. But I'm glad you touched on it. I also want to touch on quickly the railroading, because I don't think railroading is as bad as a lot of people do, but I also think railroading, I guess maybe the syntax of how I describe it's differently. I don't believe having a story is railroading. So if I say as the DM, there's three ogres coming towards the town, to me that's not railroading. That's setting the stage that there are three ogres. What becomes railroading is when I force you to deal with the ogres in the way that I wanted you to, like a
Mhm.
fight. If I say there's three ogres coming to the town, what do you do? And the players can try anything they want. And maybe some of them can't work. Like if they want to try to seduce the ogres, maybe that just won't work, no matter how well they roll. But I'm not going to tell them they can't try. And through trying, they may change the trajectory a little bit. So maybe the attempt at seduction goes so poorly that the ogres are now so mad that they don't care about the village anymore. They just want to fight the players, so the players can win by saving the village by just running away and the ogres chase them instead of attacking the village. That still solved the problem. The village wasn't destroyed by the ogres. So I have no problem setting up a situation that has hard parameters. But once I've set the situation, I let the players deal with it however they want. And to me, that's not railroading. Some people may think that it is. I don't view it that way.
Well, and the example of railroading that we had in the most recent session that we played was basically they were on this little tiny airship heading from Neverwinter to Yartar. And I knew that basically in Yartar there was this other pirate ship, like a huge pirate ship that can fly, that is now chained down to the city. And as they approach, they see that this harpoon comes and crashes through the ship. And of course, I know one of my players playing Artificer, he can cast Featherfall. And I looked up the rules to Featherfall and I was like, yep, like that is going to stop what I want to happen, which was them to pass out as they were falling down. Because I had given them this magic item from this crazy wizard guy that I knew was going to malfunction. And basically they would take damage when they fall, but they wouldn't die.
Hmm.
And so what I had to do is I had to keep coming up with these weird, like fake story reasons why this guy couldn't cast Featherfall, right? And so and that's where the players are like, listen, I just need you to pass out. Like, please just pass out. Because then from after that point, what we did is I actually had all the characters like separated out throughout the city. They were all waking up in different situations. They were coming in with basically like a writ that said they were okay to be here. And then all of a sudden now they're criminals because they thought they were in an airship trying to rescue the other airship just by
Hmm.
happenstance, right? And so I think in the chat somebody said that railroading is a great tool if used right, and I think the positive of watching everybody in their own individual scenes trying to get out of these situations that I have put them in, that one little moment of railroading to create all of that fun story element was
Right.
a necessary evil than to just say, yeah, you cast Featherfall, you all land softly together, and then all that cool stuff that I had, ready for your character to face that had to do with some people's backstories and whatever. It's all gone now. And now you
Right.
walk into the city, you have your writ, and then you can move on and nothing interesting happens.
Right. So here would be my advice. Everyone goes unconscious, you wake up, now go. So it's sort of like the improv game where you're like, okay, I need two professions. Okay, we got a firefighter and an astronaut. You're in a kitchen, it's on fire, go. So until I say go, I have all the control in the world to set up the situation. But once I say go, It's now in the player's hands to interact however they want. So I would have just done all of that before I said go.
Hmm.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
So similar to like the taking characters prisoner, which is a big thing that happens all the time where you put them in a fight where they're supposed to lose. I don't let them fight. I just say, you're overwhelmed by the superior force, you're captured, now you're in prison, go. And once I turn it over to them, they can try to escape however they want, but I don't let them go into a fight where they're going to roll d20s and try to use their spells, knowing that no matter what they do, they're going to fail. Because to me, that feels different. And I think it feels different to the player than to just say, you're captured. Now, how do you get out? Because I feel like I haven't taken their agency away. Maybe it's just a matter of my feelings, but that's how I would handle it.
Well, and I think you bring up a great point is as a DM, you have to be aware that your characters are going to have an emotional connection to their character.
Hmm.
Your players, rather. Your players are going to have an emotional connection to their character because they spent hours planning it, hours writing the backstory. Like, they don't have to prep every week like you do, but they have put tender loving care into these characters. And so you need to be prepared that, and I'm sort of a sadistic DM where if I was in that situation, I would have just kept stacking on enemies until like they would have figured out something was wrong.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I enjoy causing that little bit of emotional stress where they really think that their characters are about to die.
Hmm.
Although I very rarely actually kill
Yeah.
characters. But it's,
Same.
I don't know, for experienced players, like I feel like that's something you can look forward to as a player. But if you're a new DM and you're DMing people who aren't used to this, like you putting them in a situation where it feels insurmountable without that very quick, like you get captured, go, and dragging it out like I do, it can probably cause a lot of undue stress for, oh my gosh, I just spent, 4 hours writing this backstory. And now he's going to die session one. Like, this is so dumb,
Yeah.
And so you make a good point. And I feel like in some cases, I do follow that mentality of saying, like, I'm not going to go with all this fluff. But other times, I like them to feel like they're helpless. And that's just advanced DMing stuff, is creating that emotional fear for the actual
Yeah.
players. Like, oh no, my character is going to die.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but that,
tell the story. I did that once to my players. I just told them, like, hey, listen, there's a good chance your characters might die tonight. So go ahead and roll up a backup character. I had no intention of killing. None of their characters died, but I had the players convinced that they probably were. So I've also used some emotional manipulation before. I also really quickly want to go back to the session zero talk that even character death is something that can be optional. Like you don't have to have character death, just like the TV show thing. You can just say, Mulder and Scully are never going to die in an episode of the X-Files. It's just not going to happen. So you can say the same thing at a session zero. None of your characters will ever die unless you want them to. That's something that you can talk about in session zero. Most groups aren't going to do that, but that's totally fine. It's something you can talk about. All right, we got to move on because I'm talking too much. We're getting
yeah,
behind.
yeah.
Okay, so you decided you want to be DM. I see Tom over here. Take a drink every time we say session zero. So yeah. So you decided you want to be a DM. You know what the DM does. You've decided if you're going to run a module or write your own. You've had your session zero. Everybody's ready to play. So you get together. So the first thing that you're actually going to do, the first time that you as a DM put on your DM hat and you sort of lean forward, because I always do that. I lean forward, I put my fingers together and I say, okay. And that's like the game is starting. The very first thing you're going to do is you're going to set a scene. And you're going to do this all the time. It's one of the things that you will do most often as a DM is you're going to set the scene. And for me, there's a couple rules I follow here. One, setting the scene needs to be very quick, as quick as it can be. In some cases, it needs to be long. But I have been in games where the DM will start with like a 15-minute, and I'm not exaggerating, a 15-minute monologue describing everything about what's going on around us. And I guarantee you're going to lose most of your players before 5 minutes are up. They're going to stop listening. To me, that's way too long. I want the players to be playing the game as quickly as possible, even if playing the game is asking me questions about things I could have just told them. So, like if I say you're in a tavern and this is going on over here and this is going over here and this is going on over here, I would rather say you're in a tavern. What do you do? And then the players say, well, is there this going on in the tavern? Yes, there is. Is this going on in the tavern? Yes, there is. I would rather there be a back and forth interaction where I answer questions rather than spending 10 minutes describing everything and answering those questions before they have a chance to ask them. I think asking questions is playing the game. It also should be at the end of you setting the scene, the players should have something to do. There should be a call to action. There should be a problem to solve, something to interact with. But if you get done setting the scene and you kind of lean back and you wait for the players to go and they just sort of look at each other and look at you, then you've not done a very good job setting the scene because there's no action that needs to be taken. And I know I've kind of joked about it a couple times, but for me, the quickest way to set the scene is you're in a tavern, it's on fire. What do you do? I've now set the scene. We know what's happening. We're in a tavern. It's on fire. But they may ask questions again, like, where am I in relation to the fire? How close am I to the door? Is the fire in the kitchen? Can I put the fire out? Is there a fire extinguisher or is there a bucket of sand? That's great. I will answer all those questions all day long. But all you need to set a scene is you're in a tavern, it's on fire. What do you do? And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll turn it over to Jake, is I use that language specifically. What do you do? Every time I'm done setting the scene, because it's a clear transfer of power that I'm now done setting up. We've got our astronaut, we've got our fireman, we're ready to actually improv. What do you do? I've given power to the players. It's now their turn to be the narrator of the story, even if it's just asking me a question. So I encourage you to do something similar. Is that when you're done setting your scene, say, "What do you do?" Do you have any tips or tricks or thoughts on setting the scene, Jake?
So I have a couple, and I'm not always the best at following my own advice, but
No, no one is.
the biggest thing for me is I try so hard whenever I'm writing, that intro little thing, because I'll usually write a little bit of a paragraph. I'm a talker, and actually recently, like I've incorporated a recap video, because we've been since COVID, right? We've converted our basement to have all these chairs like 6 feet apart, and there's just a projector screen, whereas we were playing on a table. And so, since I have like this big projector set up in the basement, I've just been editing together these little videos where I'll do a little voiceover or something. And then, like, after that, then I will, set the scene they're actually in. But it takes care of all of that. What did we do last session? What
Mhm.
happened? I don't remember. It's been 2 weeks. And that speeds that section up. But I try to focus on at least two senses. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you touch? What do you gotta, I don't remember all the senses. See, smell. That's the other one that I'm
Smell,
missing.
taste, touch.
Yeah, taste. And generally, I don't use taste, I don't think.
I use smells and tastes interchangeably because I'll say like the smell is so thick it claws at your neck or
Mm.
your throat. So I kind of interchange those a little bit.
Because the biggest tell, I think, for me is somebody who isn't, I don't want to say a good DM or a bad DM, but when you're sitting there and you're getting that scene handed off to you, if you can't close your eyes and see anything other than your character sitting in an amorphous room, like I feel like the DM has failed to give you where you actually are. Because
Mhm.
it's easy to say like, yeah, you're in a tavern, but what makes this tavern special? Like you're in a tavern, there's a roaring fire, something to give them a little bit more, the smell of smoke as the tavern is on fire. I like to try and hit the senses a little bit just because it makes it easier for everybody to be on the same page.
Right.
And then as far as like handing off power, generally what I do is I try and use an NPC to do such a thing. So if it's like a chill night in a tavern, and I'm like, yeah, you're in the tavern, this is going on, the bard's playing, and then the barmaid comes up to your table. What can I get you to drink? And we just start right there. And
Yep.
that's really the transfer of power, is they have been asked a question, somebody needs to answer. And as soon as that juice gets flowing, like you start talking to the barmaid, oh, and she heard a rumor. And you're already playing the game when it was just that innocuous conversation with a
Right.
barmaid.
Yeah, I like that. I like that quite a lot. So you set the scene. You've engaged the senses. You have a situation that needs to be addressed. A question that needs to be answered, or a fire that needs to be dealt with. Now's when the rules actually come into play. So what's probably going to happen are the players are going to try to do something. They're going to try to jump out a window or kick down a door, put out a fire, or have a drinking contest. And what's going to happen, this is the thing that you will do most often as a DM when it comes to the rules, is you're going to adjudicate skill checks. That is probably 80% of what you do when it comes to the rules in D&D as a DM is you adjudicate skill checks. So very, very base level. you're going to set a DC, which stands for difficulty class, and this is how hard you think it's going to be for a average person in this world to do a thing. So they're trying to jump a pit, they're trying to lift something heavy, they're trying to throw a stone through a small target, or again, they're trying to outdrink someone else. The rules come into play. You're going to do a skill check. You're going to determine a number of how hard you think this will be. The players are going to roll a d20 and add in your modifiers based off of their skills or their natural attributes. If they equal or exceed the number you set, then they are successful. If they do not meet that number or get below it, they fail. D&D has a binary pass-fail system for skill checks. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, but that's the way the rules work. So, couple the rules that I follow, that the only three numbers I think you need to start with when you're doing skill checks is 12, 15, and 18. That's it. If you're going to set a skill check for less than 12, don't have the players roll, just say they did it. If you think it's something that most of them should pass, but you want to roll in case there's a failure, because a failure can be interesting, set it at 12. If you think this is something that some of them will pass, some of them might not, 15. And if you think it's something where most of them will fail, but maybe some of them won't, 18. You can play for like the first 5 or 6 levels of D&D only using 12, 15, and 18, and you will be fine. Eventually, particularly if you have a character that has like the jack of all trades skills, or they have like a higher proficiency, then you may want to have some things that are a little harder. But even then, if you make it too much harder, then you're sort of punishing them for being good at it. You know, like if someone's really good at knocking down a door, then the door shouldn't get any harder to knock down. You should just be easier, you know, you should be able to be better at it. So I don't like to punish people for being good at things. So 12 or less, they just did it. 12 to 15, 15 to 18. Those are the only three numbers I need most of the time when I'm doing skill checks. Another big rule for me here is that I ask my players to not roll unless I ask them to. And this is more of a role play aid. It can seem like it's kind of nitpicky, and if a player doesn't follow it, I'm not going to like yell at them. We'll kind of explain later why. But the big reason is a lot of times I'm just going to let them succeed. Like I want my players to say, I'm going to flip the table over and get behind it for cover. Like if goblins burst in with crossbows, right? If they say, I tried to flip the table, but I rolled a 4, then I'm at a sort of a sticky situation, because I want them to be able to flip the table over, because that's cool. So then I say, well, you can flip the table over anyway, but they've already rolled and rolled. They rolled a 4, so they know they should have failed. I'm kind of teaching them that their rolls don't matter, that I can just DM fiat away anything, which I think makes them feel like they have less agency. So what I want the players to do is say, I look around to see if I find anything interesting. And then I may just tell them, oh, this is what you find, but go ahead and roll because there might be more. Or you can flip the table because you're a barbarian. You have an 18 strength. Of course you can flip the table. So there's a role play aspect, and there's also an immersion aspect, that if I want them to tell me what they're doing or what they're trying to do, not say, I want to make a stealth check. I want to teach them over time to say, I want to try to sneak past the guards, and then I'll ask them to roll a stealth check, or not. I may just let them be successful at it. Does that make sense, Jake? Do you do anything
Yeah.
like that?
Well, for me, this is where I'm going to shoot myself in the foot, because I know some of my players are in the chat. I know the number that pops in my head most often when doing skill checks is 15, right? For just like the normal. And I know technically I think that's like a hard DC in D&D 5e,
Yeah.
but we're also like up to level 8 at this point. So I do sort of punish them a little bit for being good at things, because the idea of the dice in my mind is to it's chaos, it's randomness, because yeah, the barbarian can flip over a table, but what if, the way he stood up, he, like pulled a muscle in his arm really quick, and like, oh, now like he's having trouble lifting the table, and now he's, instead of looking all cool and, bad in front of all these people that he's just made angry, he looks like a weakling that can't flip a table. And so 9 times out of 10, whenever it comes to a skill check, um I'll throw that number in my head, and usually 15, but sometimes depending on, it might be like 11, or it might be even higher. And I will just go around, and I don't know, I almost don't even listen to what my players say when they're like, oh, I got a 10, I got a 15, I got a whatever, for those group checks of like perception. I'll be like, who got the highest? Okay, you see this, because like somebody's gonna see it, right? You
Right.
guys are all adventurers, so I'll just let whoever has the highest get it. um but the other thing I do, especially for interacting with NPCs, the big ones being, intimidation, persuasion, deception, um, those I like to really reward my characters for role play. And so if somebody's like, I'm gonna use intimidation, I'm gonna convince that guard to let us pass, if that's all they say to me, like, hope you roll well.
Mhm.
That's kind of the mentality I have. But if they're like, hey, listen here, pal, we're with the water deep police, so you're gonna let us pass, or there's gonna be trouble. Then it's like, okay, you can roll. And like, even if they roll 5, it's like, you sort of lose your character there for a second, but he kind of just shakes his head. He doesn't want to deal with this, so maybe he's not
Right.
intimidated, but you still succeeded, just not with the outcome you expected,
Mhm.
because I want to reward that role play to say, hey, that was great. You really stepped into character. Maybe you did a voice, whatever. Like, please, you can have
Right.
this one. And the same thing with regular skill checks for like lifting a table. The really crazy ones are like, I want to run across the wall, I want to do a flip, and I want to jump back onto this balcony. And you say, well, this is D&D, and these are all like superhuman people anyway, so they could probably do it. But the better they are at describing why their character can do this, like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm not running up the wall, I'm grabbing this rope and pulling myself as I'm running, and so that's how I'm able to get the height that I need. Like,
Right.
the more logical it sounds, the lower that skill check in my mind starts going, as they sort of talk their way out of
Right.
even having to roll a skill check.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think it's a way that you as a DM can kind of train your players to play the way that you want them to. But I would just caution, especially, I mean, because I know you mostly play with your own players, but especially like if you're running a con game, you could have a wide variety of experience levels. And I don't want anyone who's maybe not as comfortable doing that to feel like they're being punished. Because if they just say, "I want to make a charisma check to see if we can get past the guards," maybe they don't feel comfortable projecting that way. So I don't want them to feel like they're being punished for not doing it. So it is a balance. It's a fine line because I'm the same way. I want all my players to do that, and I want them to be rewarded when they do it. But I always have in the back of my mind, if there's somebody who maybe they have a stutter, but they want to play the very charismatic, smooth, suave bard because that's like a fantasy of theirs to be that character. I don't want to put them on the spot where the fact that they themselves can't actually project that confidence that their character is punished for it. And I
Yeah,
don't think that's what you're saying,
yeah,
but
yeah.
just in general, I completely agree with you. But I just want to caution anyone listening, if you're playing with people you don't know well, be careful that you don't push it so far that it becomes a punishment to people who aren't as good at it. But absolutely reward creativity, reward role play, because that's what we're here to do. And I also am a big believer, don't make the cool, fun stuff harder than the normal thing. And this is stepping into combat a little bit, but it's like if I have a character who wants to jump on the chandelier, swing across the room, and then kick somebody into a fire, I don't want to make that 5 skill checks because the way D&D works, they're going to fail one of those. It's just
Hmm.
that's what's going to happen. So if the most mathematically you know, successful version of this is I walk forward and I hit them with my sword. And that's going to make the fight end faster than the cool thing they want to do. Then I have failed because I'm teaching my players to don't do anything cool because they're just going to fail one of the 5 checks and they're going to fall on their face and they're actually going to lose the fight. I'm just going to hit it with my sword.
Well,
So
and
so
that's a
the
great.
cool super cool thing is really quickly is just as easy and often more effective. So if hitting it with a sword does like D8 damage, if you do a super cool thing and kick them into the fire, then maybe that does D12 because I want them to do more of that, and I don't want them to feel like, well, hitting it with a sword is the best thing to do. Sorry, I know talking to you. Go
No, no,
ahead.
you're good. I'm just, since Tom is listening, this is where Tom's going to be angry at me. We were playing Ghosts of Saltmarsh, or no, it was Waterdeep Dragon Heist on the stream. So you can go back to the podcast and listen to this episode. But basically, I did my attack and I killed the spider. And he said, okay, how do you want to do this? And so I went into my description and I was like, oh, it's, attached to the ceiling. So I cut off its leg and it falls to the ground. I flip my blade around and stab it in the soft underbelly. And he's like, oh, okay, well, you're going to have to roll this. And I was like, never mind. I just kill it.
Yeah,
And like, it was that quick, and I didn't mean to sound that angry about it, but it was like, you gave me this option to go forward and say like, hey, this is your chance to shine, say whatever you want. And then it became, oh, you're gonna have to roll a skill check for that. And then it's like, well, I just want to, move on. I don't want to have to rehash all this
Yeah.
with a skill check.
And we all do that. Like, I mean, I'm telling anyone listening to make the fun stuff easier and more effective than the normal stuff. But I guarantee if you listen to my podcast, there are examples of times when I didn't do that. Even if I had a good reason in my head, it probably didn't feel like a good reason, as from those listening or experiencing it. So again, we're all sharing opinions here, but I think in general we should lean that way. Another thing I do for skill checks, I'm a big fan of, is I'll let my players describe what it looks like when they succeed or when they fail. Not every time, because sometimes you just kind of have to hurry things along. But I'm a big fan of having them describe what failure looks like. I actually think this is a great for character development. So I use the example, let's say a barbarian is trying to climb over a wall to get away from people that were chasing them, right? It's a pretty high wall, so I make them roll. This isn't something I'm just going to let them do. And they fail. Me as the DM, I'm probably going to say that you get halfway up and then you slip and fall, because at the end of the game, at the end of the story here, the rules have said that player did not get their character across the wall. But if I let the player describe what happens, they may go, well, what happened is I didn't take my time and look at the wall and choose a good route. So as I got halfway up the wall, it was just physically impossible. There was nowhere for me to go, so I had to climb back down. In both cases, the barbarian is still on this side of the wall, but those are vastly different versions of how that character dealt with a challenge. One speaks to them maybe being impertinent and not taking time to analyze a problem before they attack it, which is very barbarian-esque, and it gives them the chance of saying, "I knew I couldn't succeed, so I came back down to face that challenge." That's very interesting and very cool. Versus, you fell on your butt. So you can't do it every time because the game would slow down too much. But if you have the opportunity to let players describe what it looks like in their mind when they succeed at something, or especially if they fail at something, let them. I ran a game today for the AcadeCon, and the very first check we made was a skill check. And one of the characters who should have passed based on their character and their abilities failed. And I'm like, okay, why did you fail here? You, out of everybody, you should have been the best at this. So why did you fail? And they came up with a little narrative reason, because they were distracted in doing this other thing, and that's why they failed. And I thought that was so much more interesting than you just didn't do it. So I'm a big, big believer in letting characters or letting players describe what their characters look like in their own head when they succeed, or especially when they fail.
Well,
Uh,
and
we're
that,
running we're
well, I
running
was just
really short
say,
on time, so we got to hurry.
basically what you're saying is that can open the door for other players to get a glimpse into the mind of said character, right?
Yeah.
So now everybody else at the table knows, like, man, his character is struggling with XYZ because he was distracted. And so I don't know. I really like putting some of that narrative power in the hands of the player.
Very, very cool. And I do apologize, but it's my fault, but we're going long, so we're going to have to go through some of this really quickly.
It's just Tom's game.
But there's some really important stuff I want to touch on. Non-binary skill checks. I am a huge believer that these make the game better. And this is not a D&D rule, so this is something I brought in from other games. So by D&D rules, if the skill check is a 15, if you roll and get a 15 or higher, you succeed. If you get a 14 or lower, you fail. I like to make it a little bit more wishy-washy in the middle, where there's some room for negotiation. So, for example, let's say we've got a paladin with a shield and a sword, and they're fighting a dragon, and the dragon's about to breathe fire, and the player wants to jump their character over a wall so that the fire hits the wall and doesn't burn them to death, right? Classic D&D fantasy storytelling, right? So I tell the player, okay, you need to make a skill check to jump over this wall. They roll, and they're like 3 less than what they need. By the rules of the game, they fail. I would want to make this sort of a bargain situation where I may say to them, okay, well, how about this? You're going to fail unless you do something extreme. So let's say maybe you take this shield, this magical shield that's a family heirloom of yours that was handed down to you by your great, 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 great grandfather. You throw it Captain America style, and it sticks into the wall about 2 feet up, and then you jump on it and you use it to springboard over. Now you're on the other side of the wall, but for the rest of this fight, you don't have your shield anymore. And then I ask them, do you want to do that? And they can say no, I don't. I would rather just take the blast and keep my shield. That's fine. That's what the rules said. That's what happens. Move on. But to me, that's a really cool idea is to throw the shield and now, okay, maybe I take a turn to get my shield back, or how does that change the battle? So I'm a lot more willing to negotiate and say, well, what if this, but it cost you this? It's basically success at a cost. It's from other games, Fate in particular. But I always make sure that it's an option the players have the choice of saying yes or no to. And they may even bargain and say, what about this instead? But I'm still over the wall and I have my shield, but this instead. Okay, if I think this is an interesting addition, this is dramatic, then I'll let them succeed on what should have been a fail with a cost to, like, it's not a clean success, there's a cost to it. So I'm a very, very, very big believer in success at a cost with a role that's a little bit under, so taking away non-binary success. The other thing I will do is I'll sometimes have them roll skill checks that don't really matter to the success of what they're doing, but it's sort of a story aid to me. So my example here is, let's say we have a rogue that wants to go into the middle of the bazaar in the town they just got to, and they're going to pickpocket. They're a rogue. They know how to pickpocket. Normally, I wouldn't make them roll for this at all. I'd just say, okay, yeah, you're good at this. This is what you do. You can just spend some time in the tavern or in the bazaar, and I'll roll a die. You gain 20 gold. But this time, I might say, you know what? Let's go ahead and roll a d20 just to see how this goes. This isn't to see if you are successful. I just want to, for like a story purpose. And let's say they roll poorly. They are still successful at pickpocketing, but maybe that low roll means that there's another rogue working the same area that sees your character pickpocketing and is like, they're not part of the Thieves Guild. They're not supposed to be working this part. So later that night, they get a visit from this person, some other local Thieves Guild saying, hey, you're not supposed to work in our area. And now I've created drama. They have to deal with this, this faction, this Thieves Guild that is now upset at them for working in the town they don't have the right to. Or maybe they roll really well and they get like a 19 or a 20, and the same thing happens, but rather than being mad, this other rogue is like, man, this person has skills. And so that night they show up and say, hey, we want to bring you into our guild because we think you would be an asset to our guild. None of that was supposed to happen when I started the game session, but just having them roll and going, okay, this is a really good roll. What does that mean? It could mean that there's an observer that is impressed by them. It doesn't mean they didn't succeed or they did succeed or they didn't get more gold or less gold, but how does that change the story? And I think that's definitely an advanced DMing technique, but it's something I do a lot to help me. It's like an improv technique, is it helps me create something I hadn't planned on. And it's fun for me to do that and go, okay, I'm now going to create this whole other thing that did not exist. It's not on my note cards, but I think it would be fun and it adds to the story just because I had them roll, even though it doesn't actually affect the skill check. Does that make sense at all, Jake?
Yeah, I feel like I do something similar to that, where it may not, and a lot of times it's behind the scenes where
Mhm.
I'll literally just roll a dice, and like whether like the characters are just talking and I'm rolling to see if somebody overhears, or maybe I'm rolling just to make them nervous about what I'm doing behind the DM screen. But yeah, I'll do that myself because I don't want to make those choices by myself, and that's where the dice, just using them to let them decide for you,
Right.
is a lot easier than trying to well, I'm gonna have this happen and this happen, but leaving it up to the dice is always a good choice.
Another thing I've done before is I've had someone say, I want to look to see if anybody's following us. I want to do a spot check. Does anybody seem to be paying attention? And they roll really well. Yeah, you see somebody watching you. There wasn't anybody watching them before, but the fact that they wanted to do this and they rolled well, I've now created someone, and I'll figure out later why and who they are. But I've basically just created this person, this NPC, in relation to because it seems like the players wanted to be watched because they thought that would be fun, or they showed me this is something they're interested in, so I would reward that. Now I'm never going to tell the player I just made this person up. As far as they are ever going to know, yes, they were being followed the whole time. And the only reason they know is because they had the foresight to think, oh, I want to look to see if we're being tailed. And then you rolled well. But you have to maintain the illusion that that was always happening, but only now do they know it because of the choices they made.
Well, and that's
There,
what I always say is players are the best storytellers.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so we've got a skill challenge, or we've dove out of the tavern that's on fire. Now we're outside. Turns out the reason the tavern's on fire is because there's a bunch of goblins out there with torches. At some point, you're probably going to start rolling dice for combat. If you're playing D&D, especially, it's a combat heavy game. It's part of the game. It's a part a lot of people like. But really, combat is just skill checks. They're just specifically defined. Instead of rolling against a DC, you're rolling against AC, which is armor class, which is just a DC that's already set for you by the rules. Instead of rolling a skill check to like jump a pit, you're rolling a combat check, which is based on your attributes. It has its same bonuses. It's basically the same exact thing. So a couple things, and again, I'm gonna have to go very quick here. I do apologize. And Tom, we may go a little bit past 8:30. I'm sorry. Uh, and when it comes to combat, your job is to lose. As the DM, that's what you're supposed to do. You are supposed to lose. Your masterminds are supposed to get outwitted. Their riddles are supposed to be solved. Their minions are supposed to be bested. The dragons are supposed to be slain. That is your job. If you want to win a fight, you can always win a fight because you're the DM. You can just win the fight, right? But your job is to lose, but to make your loss interesting and dramatic. And this isn't like sometimes players will get into fights they can't win. I'm not talking about every single time, but in general, fights are there to be interesting, dramatic, to cause them to use resources, to give them interesting, dramatic moments to role play where like one character is being attacked by four people. And how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to try to go save them? But at the end of the day, your job is to lose. A lot of times D&D combat feels like a separate game. It's like you're role playing, you're having fun, you're talking in character, and now that the dice come out for combat, it's like you're playing a miniatures war game. And if you like that, that's fine. I don't. I like to try to interject role play into the combat as much as I can, and I encourage you to do the same thing as the DM. One of the things that I've done to make my games a lot more cinematic when it comes to combat is the understanding that hit points and armor class are completely abstractions. They are not supposed to be a realistic representation of like health. And so, what I mean by this is when you roll to hit in combat, a hit means that you are lowering the hit points of the opponent. It doesn't mean you actually stab them with a weapon. It can mean that, but it doesn't have to mean that. So when you realize that a hit can actually be a miss and a miss can actually be a hit, it gives you the vocabulary to describe combats a lot more cinematically. So if I go to swing my sword and I hit you, I rolled high enough to hit your armor class, we could still describe that as the opponent throwing up a shield and taking that sword on the arm, but it hurts their arm. It dislocates their shoulder. It just hurts because it hurts when you get hit by a sword when you're holding a shield. So they lose hit points, but it doesn't mean I actually stabbed them in the face. When I roll a miss, so my weapon did not do damage, that doesn't mean I whiffed, like striking out in Little League, or I shot an arrow into the woods. Maybe the arrow hit their armor and stuck in their armor, but it didn't penetrate enough to actually hurt them. So all that means is that they didn't lose hit points, but it doesn't mean you missed them. So you can start describing battles a lot more epically and cinematically when you realize that hits can be misses and misses can be hits. And especially when you get to the end, kind of like what Jake was talking about earlier, where, okay, you've now killed this thing. Describe what that kill looks like. If the rules have said that this creature is now dead, then the player should feel free to describe that however they want, including they miss with their weapon, but the creature ducks out of the way, loses their balance, and falls over a cliff. It doesn't matter if at the end of the turn the creature is dead. They can describe that however they want. So when you turn that over to them and say, okay, what does it look like when you killed the goblin? Let them describe it however they want. As long as at the end the goblin's dead, it doesn't matter. I know I'm going super quick. Jake, what do you want to talk about combat?
Well, I feel like that's my weakest part. And what's important, like in the whole wide range of being a DM, is you need to know where your players have fun. And so I can look at my table and I can say, hey, Andy over here, he enjoys the story and the rules of him, right? I can look at my wife and one of my other players, Alex, who's on the Ghost of Star Wars stream, like combat. That's what they want. They want to see the combat, they want to do the combat. And like, we got other players in there who just they really like the story and they like role playing out and they want to get down into character and act it out. But you got to know, well, whenever we do combat, this player kind of checks out and then they have their predetermined list of this is what I'm doing, okay, next.
Mhm.
And so I feel like bringing in some of those theatrical elements into the combat can maybe pull some of those people who aren't interested in, I have this much armor class and I can do this many spells in a turn, blah, blah, blah. Maybe giving them that chance to say, how are you swinging your sword at this person, and it becomes sort of a game back and forth of how are you going to hit me, and oh, you missed, so how am I going to describe this, and you can give that to your players too, to say, oh, he misses, what happens to your character when he misses. And of course,
Mhm.
depending on how many people you have at your table and how long the battle's supposed to be, you want to, rein that in a little bit. But you always want to make sure everybody is engaged, and combat is the part where I struggle the most because I don't enjoy combat. And
Mhm.
I've tried so hard to emulate, Matt Mercer on the Critical Role. He does a really great job of describing every single action somebody takes in combat. And so sometimes, to just get refreshed, I'll watch some Critical Role so I can be like, this is how I need to be describing battles, not, oh, that's a miss, okay, Alex, you're up. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a hit, that's 4 damage, got it. It's
Yeah.
not a transaction. It's still part of the story.
Right, and that's something we all struggle with. I even myself, I try to be very cinematic, but especially if a combat's gone a long time, the longer it goes, the less of that I do. And at
Mhm.
the end, it's like, okay, roll hit, okay, roll hit, okay, it's dead. So what I would say there is, it's okay if the outcome is set. Like there's you started with 12 goblins, and now there's only one goblin left. It's okay to just be like, okay, you finished the battle. Like it's okay to just say you're going to win here. The goblin's not going to kill all of you, so we can just skip to the end. And once it starts where it's no longer fun to play it out, you can just stop playing it out and just skip to the end. I think that's totally fine.
Yeah.
Maps and minis, a lot of people love them. If you love them, great. I don't love them, so I don't use them. Great. Both of them have their positives and negatives. Again, I don't have time, unfortunately, to go into that a whole lot, but each one has their own pros and cons. If whichever one you use, you're going to have to try to overcome the cons of it, and you want to lean into the pros, what it does well. Theater of the Mind does cinematic battles very well because you can picture it in your own mind like a movie. Maps and Minis do more complex battles better because you can clearly see where people are. You can have environmental effects that trigger in certain positions. You can have traps. You can have a lot more enemies on the screen because you can keep track of them easier. If I have more than three bad guys in a battle, I'm going to lose track of them. So we don't have time to go into depth here, but I would say try both, especially if you're new, and see which one you like better. If you're going to do Theater of the Mind, start with a small battle. Like maybe there's just like one guard that overhears your character sneaking through the palace. Maybe that's not the time you need to break out the full map and mini for one guard, which is probably going to get taken out in one turn before he actually even goes. If you are going to do a big battle with like a set piece and there's like three different waves of enemies that are going to come in, that might be a good time to break out the maps and minis and make sure that you're keeping track of everything. But whichever one you do, be open to trying the other. And then when you find the one that you like best, lean into it. And still on occasion, throw in the other just for variety.
And I would
I'm a
just
bit,
say, tagging onto it really quick, if you're going to do theater of the mind, you need to be prepared to answer questions about how far away people are,
yep,
because wizards and rangers, like, they're relying on that for their spells and their range on arrows and stuff. So you need to be very clear, because it's easy to get just sort of muddied up. Like, yeah, there's one guy, he's over there a couple feet away. Like,
yeah,
what is a couple feet? Is he, able to hide behind anything? You need
yeah.
to be very clear with your descriptions.
And that's one of the cons of using that you have to overcome. But I will, again, I'm very loosey goosey, and I tell people I am. So I will do things like, okay, you're fighting five goblins. Player wants to use a fireball. I'll say, okay, you can get all five of them, but you're also going to get Tom's character, or you can get four of them and miss Tom. I have
Mhm.
no idea where these goblins are actually standing, but I'm giving them a dynamic choice of how they're going to interact. Or you can move to get line of sight. I still don't know how close you are, how far you are, but yes, you can do that. I always err on the side of the players. Like, can I reach it if I run this turn? Yeah, of course you can. I don't care if it's 35 feet or 47 feet. If you want to run in charge, you're going to be able to hit them, because to me, that's more interesting than stopping, your turn mid run.
Mhm.
That's to me not fun. Some people, that is fun. That is their fun of like, if I don't use this particular skill and talent here, and because I have this feat, I'm able to actually move that extra 5 feet. That's why I can get there. And that's why I can attack this turn. And that's why the battle turns. Then those are the types of people who probably would enjoy a maps and mini fight, and we should give them that fight. For me, I don't, so I kind of shy away from that. I'm also not good at combat, so if you like combat, you're probably not going to like my games. Alternate win conditions. I do not like battles that end only when everything on one side or the other is killed. I almost always have a different way that you can win. but whether it be take out the chieftain or take out the wizard, and then all the other enemies will scatter, or maybe both sides are trying to get to a certain thing. Well, destroy that thing. Like if the goblins are here because you have the orb of Aranok, if you break the orb, the goblins have no reason to be here anymore. They're not going to keep fighting you now that their reason for being here is gone, so they can leave. I always try to throw in some way that the players can end a battle by doing something other than just killing everything on the field, because I think that's boring. I'm a big fan of multi-tiered combats. This is one of the ways that I can cheat because I'm not good at designing encounters and I may make them too tough or too easy. So I will know in my head, okay, there's 5 goblins, but there might be 5 more. So if the players are having a really hard time fighting the 5 goblins, then the other 5 just don't show up. No one ever knows they were supposed to be there. The battle was tough. We had fun. The end. If they go through those 5 so easily, maybe 10 more show up. It was supposed to be 5, but now it's 10. Or instead of 5 ogres, it's 5 goblins and 2 ogres or something like that. So I kind of build in the idea that there could be waves of enemies that come to help me modulate the difficulty of the battle so that it hits where I want it to hit. Sometimes battles should be easy. It's okay for sometimes for the players just to wipe the board with everything because it makes them feel cool and powerful. They got this new spell, and that spell took out half the goblins in one round. Great. I want you to feel cool about that. Sometimes you should fight battles that are so tough that you may not win or you may have to run from, but most battles should be kind of in the middle. Because you want them to use their resources, you want them to have fun, you want them to roll some dice, get some good hits in, but you probably don't want to kill them. Again, I'm looking at my outline here. Very quickly, I want to talk about fudging because this is something that divides people like politics and religion. Some people think fudging's totally cool. Some people think it's anathema to the game, and if you fudge, then you are evil and no one should ever do it. I'm a big believer that fudging is okay, but I know that is subjective. That is my opinion. That's not fact. So you have to judge that for you and your players. But I'm also a big believer that if you fudge, they can never know that you do it. I tell my players I fudge. Like I'm very open about it. If you play at my table, absolutely, I may roll a d20 and then completely ignore what it says, but I guarantee you will never know when I do it or not. It's like a magic trick. I know that a magician is not actually bending the laws of physics and actually making a dove appear out of nowhere. I know the dove was already somewhere in its coat or in his or her coat, right? But if you do it well and I don't see how the trick works, then I'm like, oh, that's amazing. I love it. I'm happy. I feel the same way about fudging. If I do it in a way that you don't realize I've done it, then I didn't actually do it. But if you see the trick being done, it ruins the illusion, and that's bad. So very, very quickly, Jake, because we got like 2 minutes to wrap up. How do you feel about fudging? Pro, con, or anything like that?
I mean, the times that I fudge, if failing is going to take fun away from somebody, then why on earth am I going to tell them, oh, you failed? You know, like, because you can just see that moment when they have this really cool plan. And I'm thinking of my player Grant. He always comes up with the coolest plans, and literally his dice are always the thing that makes his plans not happen. And so whenever I have the power to, I fudge, because it's more important that your players are having fun than you to respect some sort of, law about whatever the dice says goes. Because that's what you're here for. You're here to have fun, and you're here to make sure everybody's having fun. And it's not fun to come up with this cool plan and then have it taken away because you did not roll high. Especially when you have a lot of points in that skill and then you just literally rolled like crap.
Yeah. And again, it's a balancing act because sometimes failure can be fun. A lot of times failure can be fun. But that's part of the reason why I think we have DMs and not computers that run this, is that you need to judge the table. And I also roll fudging into things like changing hit points. If the ogre has 37 hit points and a character rolls a critical hit and does this like great one-liner and does 36 points of damage, that ogre's dead. I'm going to let that be the killing blow, because that's an awesome way for that ogre to die, rather than, oh, well, one more person needs to go and does one more hit point. And on the opposite side of that, if you're fighting this evil lich who in the backstory of one of the characters corrupted someone's family member, and like they have an oath of vengeance against this lich, and the lich has 7 hit points left, and the player in front of that character rolls and does 8 points of damage, the lich doesn't die. The lich has -1 hit points until that player gets the last hit.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, again, there are times where maybe there's fun to be had with that player going, wait, you just stole the kill. You know, that could be a fun moment, is that player getting mad at the other player for being successful. So all of these are not hard and fast rules, but you have to read the table and think of what's the most fun that can happen right now. And for me, sometimes fudging hit points, fudging armor class, fudging the number of enemies, changing it. Sometimes I'll just forget. I'll forget that, hey, there's 7 goblins, but maybe 2 of them didn't attack this turn. I'll just, you know, again, conveniently forget that they just didn't go this turn. And if no one realizes I've done that, then I didn't do it, and that's all that matters. We had a question, just because really quickly, as far as balancing difficulty levels. I think level 1 is really hard because people have so few hit points, but they do so much damage that you can really easily wipe a player out. And then at higher levels, because they can do so many things. So that's why I encourage you to use waves and reinforcements, because then you can always modulate the difficulty as you go. If the players are wiping things out, just keep adding more. If they're having trouble, then you just don't send the reinforcement ins, regardless of what level they're in.
Well, and when you pick like a big bad evil guy, right?
Yep.
And you're trying to make this battle last and they're just wrecking him. Don't be afraid to make him go into negative hit points. They don't know how much health he actually has. And something else I'll do to balance it even more is I'll give, like, if it's one guy, I'll give him multiple turns in initiative. So everybody gets 1 turn, but he's got 3 turns.
Yeah.
So, you know, obviously, you know, that means he has 3 reactions. He has 3 actions. He has 3 movements. Like he's really powerful. And it sort of brings it back up, because it's all about reading the room when you start going off book. And you don't want to just start killing off people's characters because you wanted this to feel hard. So it's a balancing act in and of itself when you stray too far from the rules, because they are there for a reason.
And anytime I do that, it's to make the game more fun. It's never to punish a player. Like, I'm just going to take this. Like, I'm never going to fudge and then kill a character. Like, that's never going to happen. I might fudge and let the bad guys survive 1 more round so they get to do the super cool power that I wanted to show off. And, you know, basically all the players killed them in the first turn. I never got to go. I'll let them live an extra round in negative 12 hit points so they get to do their super cool thing. But I'm not going to kill a character by doing that super cool thing, because that's not fun. So very quickly, a couple really quick things. Listen to your players, steal their ideas, and make them yours. The players will come up with better stuff than you ever could have thought of. And don't be afraid that them going, hey, I'm pretty sure the mayor is the killer, and here's why. And in your head, the mayor wasn't the killer, but when they lay out their reasons to, like, the other players, you're like, actually, that makes a lot of sense. And I think now the mayor was the killer the whole time. Don't think that, well, that fact that they figured that out is going to ruin the surprise. It actually will make them feel very smart when they're like, I knew it. I told you it was the mayor. I knew it was the mayor the second session, and here's why. And it wasn't the mayor until the second session when you changed it because it made a better story. As long as you don't tell them that you changed it, it'll be great. So don't think that it's ruining any sort of surprise if you steal their ideas and then bring them back. It's actually a great technique because they will come up with better stuff. And invariably, you will mess up. You will say something that is contrary to something that you've said before. Classic example, I had set up something where I threw out some random detail that the killer had to be left-handed. You know, it's like a forensics thing. It has to be left-handed. Get to the end of the campaign, they find the killer, and turns out the killer's right-handed. And I've just messed up. I've made a mistake, whatever the mistake may be. Whenever a player says, wait, that doesn't make sense because you said this, this is my uber secret DM strategy tip. You just sort of lean in and smile and go, that is weird, isn't it? And then you lean back. And now you have to figure out before next session what the heck just actually happened. And it could be a doppelganger. It could be something else, but just make it seem like that was always part of the plan. And they are smart for realizing that it wasn't a mistake. We did what I wanted to. I apologize.
So did I.
Talked too much, but
you can do it. Don't be scared. Like,
thoughts.
literally, I did it with no prep, no reading. I literally played like 4 sessions and then said, I'm going to do this. So literally, just do it. The worst thing that could possibly happen is you guys just have a really fun time. Because even when you screw up and it's, you know, people still have fun. You know, it's a fun thing to do. And don't get stressed about it. Just do it.
Wholly, just start. Your first game's not going to be your best. Absolutely. It may not even be fun, but once you start, you'll get better. And I think it's harder to start than it is to get better. So just run your first game. You're going to do the best you can, and then you'll keep going. And then Fade to the Sand, same thing. I'm very similar to Jake on inspiration. I let people have more than one. And then the easiest way to get inspiration is to make me laugh. If you do something that makes me laugh, you get inspiration, because if I'm laughing, I'm having a good time. And that's why we're all there. Uh, we had so much more stuff to talk about. I'm so sorry that we have to go, but we have to end this because Tom is going to beat me over the head. Thank you all for listening. Great questions. Hopefully, something we have said will resonate with you, give you confidence to go back and start playing games at your table, running games for your players, and start this lifelong journey of what I think is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. Jake, thank you for joining me and adding your insights. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure
Tom,
to be here.
Tom, thank you for hosting. And we're going to jump off here because we got something else coming up at 9. If you're not doing other things with the AcadeCon, you can still buy a badge. There's still games that need players. Please jump in and play games with us. And if not this year, next year, real life in Dayton, fingers crossed, we can actually get together in person and play some games next
Yes.
year in Ohio. So thanks. And